Let's just return to some interesting work that you did post-war, because I mentioned earlier, of course, that was a time when there were a lot of desertions, and also there was a lot of suing for adultery and all kinds of matters of that type. And in those days when there were claims for desertion or adultery or maintenance, of which I imagine there were very many, you were naturally appearing for before juries, and but there were times, I think, when you actually had a choice of whether or not to appear before a jury.
You did have a choice. You could have a single judge if you liked, if you particularly knew he or she would be fair.
She?
Oh, yes.
Later on.
And Elizabeth Everett's era, there were more than Elizabeth there. Josephine Maxwell, for one. She had no real experience of the law, but she was a terrific judge because she had a personality, and she's absolutely fair, although she was a mother herself, so if you're acting for the mother in a child case, you didn't lose before Josephine. But that's all right, she wasn't that biased. But by the same token, we're talking about whether or not you present in jury trials, in criminal matters, the case to a jury. That's quite different from the era that we were just speaking of, where you had juries for most things. And if you go back to the 19th century, coronial inquiries had a jury. What on earth for? Okay, we've learnt, therefore, about how to go about it. And I don't believe that our jury system in criminal matters will go away. More particularly, they won't change it in a large way. And that's important.
Would I be right in thinking those jury trials for the coronial matters you were just mentioning was because of some need to see justice done no matter what? I'm thinking of the case, and I'm trying to remember the American poisoner who was hanged, and his name will come back to me, but that was a case, a coronial case that was held before a jury. It was a well case of its time. It was actually conducted in England, but he was American-born, and his name will come back to me.
I think the point is that in that era, everyone thought that you should put it in the hands of the common man. Therefore, even in a coronial inquiry on a death like the madman of that 19th century, the knifer, they felt that you had to have juries because it was the men and women in the street, or not so many women. And that was important, so they used it all. Now we have greater faith in judges. They're incorruptible in Australia, I believe. And that's very important because a judge will do his work the harder, the quicker, and so you get through it. And it was motivated at a time when motor car accident cases, running down cases we call them, were mounting out so much with juries, they had to stop. And that was the main reason they stopped. Judges got through them more quickly and were just as fair.
Just a point of clarification. Running down cases that you've just mentioned, I interviewed Elaine Kiddle, who was at the Victorian Bar, the sixth woman at the Victorian Bar. She'd come from the English bar, and she said when she'd come to Australia, she heard about running down jurisdiction, and she said, this was very strange. We never did this in England.
That's right, they didn't. And
why?
Well, because it grew up in the jury era, and everyone thought, this is good. But then the insurance companies saw huge monies being given out by juries, ridiculous sums. They moved to have it changed and succeeded. At first, people had no faith in judges because the jury system is so wonderful in Australia, in the United States, etc. They suddenly realised that the judges could do just as good a job, and the lists have gone down. So you see, we go away to a circuit and there are 300 cases in 3 weeks. You do them. You work very hard because a judge is more efficient than having a jury being impanelled and challenges and so forth.
Did you do a lot of circuit work over the years?
I did, but more particularly as a judge. I did plenty of circuit work anyhow, and particularly when I was beginning to specialise in family law, I went away to the circuit courts and did case after case. But more particularly, when I was a judge, I opted to do it at a time when my wife had died and I was able to go away without commitments. Many couldn't, because they didn't like to be away from their families. But I found it thoroughly intriguing to go away to the bush and deal with 300 cases in 3 weeks. That's a fair feat. You worked very hard, you got rid of the judgments at night by working on it, but it gave you a great glow of achievement.
So you, unlike many, did not find it lonely?
No. And that's partly because if those who were there and they're not appearing before me, the locals particularly, I could have a drink with them and a meal with them. I used to cut it down when I had the hard work, but they always gave us an end of sitting party, and it was great fun to mix with all the local people and the bar. Really very good. If you didn't do that and aloofly said, I'm going back to town, they marked you.
Some, of course, felt they needed to do that to maintain an appearance of, if you like, impartiality.
Yeah, well, I think it's a myth. You can be impartial and still be friendly to those who appear before you. You put yourself in a cage because you think that's the best way to be a judge and be aloof. You're making a very big mistake. You're cutting yourself off from the people that you should be able to trust.
How many of your brethren thought like that, though?
Not many.
You really would be rather singular. I've not heard anyone talk that way before.
No, I was, and I think some thought I got into trouble by being too familiar. I got through the cases. Jimmy, what's his name? Economos was a bit the same. Jim was rough and tumble, though. I mean, he'd have 150 cases in his list, and he'd start by saying, look, I'm going to start case 142, because he knew they weren't ready, they weren't even there. And so he'd say, oh, well, all right, I think this in that case, and then he'd sort it out. Now, Jimmy was too rough, but he was a very astute, superb intelligence, and he could get through the work. A bit rough, but doesn't matter. Well, I was trying to be the same, get through the work and talk to people and get a bit, but you had to be impartial, and that's not easy.
When I interviewed Derek Cassidy, he spoke about two judges he remembered on the country circuit very well, and one he spoke of was called Smiling Death. Did you ever come across Smiling Death at all? Smiling Death was called that because he had the nicest smile when he handed out the nastiest sentence.
That's right. I can't remember.
It was Smiling Death and Country Cousin.
Yeah, I can't remember Smiling Death. It might come to me, but that's true. He was that way. He was smiling, and even when he sent them away. But there was the other bloke. We called him some name akin to Sleepy. He won't come to mind. He's on the district court.
Or Dozy, maybe?
Oh, no. This bloke had a very slow voice. Mr. Twigg, are you sure that's the right submission? But you knew he was right. He was just laid back. I can't remember his name. He's in the district court.